Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This week, many of us are celebrating Easter or Passover or have begun Ramadan. Celebrations with a central theme of food. And for gatherings large or small, there's another very noticeable difference this year, and that is the cost of food. We're all feeling the impact of food inflation. But for some of us, that's the difference between eating or not. The link between food inflation and food insecurity in Canada is being felt now harder than ever before. And the issue goes straight to the heart of Second Harvest's vision of a Canada with no waste and no hunger. A vision we are determined to achieve. For those of you who are not familiar with Second Harvest, we are Canada's largest food rescue organization, and we are experts in perishable food recovery. We are thought leaders and innovators on the subject of food loss and waste and how it impacts our climate. We rescue surplus, perishable food from right across the supply chain. Fresh, nutritious food that we redirect to many of the over 61,000 charities and nonprofits that exist supporting people with food. Places like food banks, community centers, schools, ensuring people have access to the food they need. We work directly with food industry and food businesses, connecting their surplus food with social service organizations across this country. We would like to acknowledge that the land we're sharing today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. This territory is part of the Dish with One Spoon, which invites people to come together in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect, and to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. I'm Lori Nickel, the CEO of Second Harvest, and I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today. And I'm here with the incomparable Dr. Martin Gooch, CEO of Value Chain Management International, who we commissioned to do the research with his incredible team. I would also like to thank the amazing Veronica Summerhill from Second Harvest for her leadership managing this really critical project. Second Harvest conducts research to better understand problems within Canada's food system, to ensure we can collaborate and find common sense solutions. Today's report, Wasted Opportunity, is our third report in a series that began with the avoidable crisis of food waste, a roadmap showing how almost 9 million metric tons of food is lost or wasted by the food industry each and every year. The second report, Canada's Invisible Food Network, was the first report to reveal the massive invisible patchwork of over 61,000 community organizations that are distributing food to people in need. Our latest report identifies how much surplus edible food is being wasted. It's called Wasted Opportunity. From right across the supply chain, and why? Food that could and should be used for its highest and intended purpose of feeding people. This research is important as it verifies both the scale and opportunity of surplus edible food right across this country. So we are in a better position to develop and implement sustainable solutions for systemic problems that should not exist. Because we know that when food ends up in landfills, it directly contributes to our climate crisis. And we also know that people are having a harder time than ever to get the food they need. It's been a really tough couple of years, and while we're all hopeful the worst is behind us, what is clear is Canadians and our planet continues to need our help. The research identifies the number of food businesses across the country, the types of surplus edible food that is wasted, and where it comes from. We seek to understand why so much of this surplus edible food is not being redistributed to people. And finally, it proposes solutions that that turn edible food waste into opportunity for everyone. Like our previous reports, this groundbreaking research contains many firsts, including the total amount of surplus edible food produced by Canada's food industry, the percentage of surplus edible food that isn't rescued and redistributed for human consumption, the number of food businesses and potential donors of surplus edible food within Canada's food industry, and so many others. Dr. Martin Gooch will review the methodology later in this presentation, as well as convey other information that makes this research so valuable. We've presented the findings in a technical report, and for ease of understanding, we've produced a simplified version that walks through this complex and challenging issue. All reports are available to download at SecondHarvest.ca. We learned from the research that there are over 127,000 food businesses in Canada. These businesses range from across the supply chain: fisheries, food processors, manufacturers, wholesalers, grocers, hotels, and restaurants. And we were able to conclude that 45%, or almost 60,000 of them, are likely to have surplus edible food. Food that is great, but it's just extra. For example, food becomes surplus when a farmer's crop is bigger than expected, and there is excess produce beyond the contracted amounts. This food is often not sellable due to exclusivity agreements made with distributors in advance of the harvest. Yet a surplus apple is still edible and has the same nutritional value as apples at the supermarket. Wholesalers and farms are the least likely to say they have surplus edible food, but those that identified they do are disposing of over 1 ton per month per business. Food businesses right across this awesome country have surplus edible food. Ontario and Quebec, the provinces with the greatest population and the largest number of food businesses, identified as having the most surplus edible food, in comparison to the Atlantic and Western regions. But the opportunity to prevent waste exists right across this country, from fisheries in the Atlantic to restaurants in BC and everywhere in between. For every category of food being produced, there is excess. There's dairy, grains, produce, and protein. Much of this food is perishable, and it is of the richest nutritional value. It's also the type of food that's in shortest supply for the thousands of charitable organizations feeding people experiencing hunger. When you add it all up, our research conservatively estimates that Canada's food system produces 3.2 million tons of surplus food per year. About 3.1 million tons of that goes to destinations other than feeding people, including landfills. If you consider that a refrigerated transport truck can hold about 25 tons of food, that's enough to fill 124,000 tractor trailer loads. That is 6,834,330,120 meals. Enough food to provide every Canadian dinner for the next 6 months. Only 4% of this great food is being rescued, leaving 96% of all the surplus edible food being wasted, when it really could be redistributed to people who need food. This happens mainly because the key players in our food system, from farmers to food service, believe it's more efficient or less risky to dispose of food rather than redistribute it. The fact that this is happening, given the times we are all in, is tragic. We have an opportunity, we have an obligation to support Canadians with this healthy food. Food inflation and supply chain woes continue to make things challenging for every Canadian. 60% of which said recently they are finding it difficult to feed their families, according to an Angus Reid poll. We have an obligation because Canada's Invisible Food Network indicated 6.7 million Canadians, that's about 18% of us, and growing, are accessing food at a food charity. So why is all this waste happening? The bottom line is that acknowledging and saving surplus edible food is believed to not be good for business. The food system is big business, built to move in one way: picking, processing, packaging, selling, and serving food. It operates in a linear fashion. Production lines are continuous and run at high volume. Margins are tight, and there's a need for efficiency. The regulatory compliance for safe food handling is also a factor. Storage capacity, particularly for frozen or refrigerated foods, is limited and costly. Meanwhile, the charitable food sector has limited financial and logistical resources to quickly and efficiently support the rescue and redistribution of food. Shifting perceptions around the perceived complexities that come with donating food require financial and logistical solutions to be introduced that turn the food system from a linear one into a circular one. We learn the likelihood of waste occurs when there is no appreciable financial benefit. Canada's food industry makes profits from production, distribution, and the sale of food. It is natural for industry stakeholders to view the donation of surplus food as less important to their commercial interests. In the hope of capturing cents on the dollar, most businesses retain food until it gets very close to its best before date and then dispose of it at the cheapest possible cost. Surplus edible food is really just considered a budget item, and businesses assume that the donation of food will be more costly than sending it to landfill. Farming, where margins are thin, is a great example of an industry that would require a serious financial incentive. Currently, farmers believe their cost of donation is 3 times that of alternative options such as landfill or disposal, which helps us understand why they are less inclined to rescue and redistribute that great food. Businesses told us they have legal liability concerns around someone becoming ill from donated food, particularly perishable food. But these concerns are unfounded. In every part of Canada, there is legislation to protect companies and individuals who donate food rather than throwing it away. Furthermore, there is no documented case in Canada or the US that donated food made somebody sick and they were sued. We're safe. Industry also sometimes is reluctant to provide this food as the charitable food sector has limited financial resources and often are reliant on volunteers, which can present challenges and around communication and workflow for businesses that want to donate to food rescue groups. And with such an enormous landmass in Canada, it can be a challenge to access the required transportation and cold storage required to handle huge quantities of perishable food that are produced and wasted on a regular basis. And that's why Second Harvest created the Food Rescue app, to facilitate communication between businesses that have surplus food and organizations like Second Harvest that can coordinate this food rescue. Our online platform and third-party logistics allow us to scale food rescue across the country without adding more bricks and mortar. We also enable businesses and nonprofits to track sustainability metrics from their food rescue efforts. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Martin Gooch, who will explain how the research was conducted.
Thank you, Laurie, and thank you to Second Harvest for engaging BCMI to complete this important research. So as Laurie mentioned, the Avoidable Crisis of Food Waste research completed in 2019 identified that there was almost 9 million tonnes of avoidable, potentially edible food going to waste each year. The Invisible Network research completed and published last year identified that that was almost twice the amount of food it would take to meet all the needs of the vulnerable population in Canada. Though what that research did not do, neither the research provided enough granular insights to enable Second Harvest and the other charitable organisations across Canada to identify where's the best sources of food, how could food be best rescued, and what were the challenges and opportunities surrounding that. And that was the purpose of this research, and the objectives reflected that. Including quantifying the comparative impact of different barriers that would need to be addressed to secure the volume of food that we knew was there, and quantify the different types of the food and the general regional location of that food. The food industry is a complex beast. It's become increasingly complex, and it also differs by region. In different regions of the country, you have certain types of food industry which you don't have in other regions, which needed to be quantified, and then the results inferred in terms of where's the most likely sources of food, what volumes of food, what times of the year is certain food more likely to be available, and how to then secure and redistribute that food in the most efficient and effective way. So understanding the food industry, it's akin to peeling back the layers of an onion. Every time you identify a certain level of data, then you identify new opportunities. And when you're going into this, there'd be at least 3 layers of this onion. There'd be the factors, the things we knew already, the knowns as we called them. And we also knew there'd be some knowns that we don't currently know at the moment. So we called those the unknown knowns. And then we figured that as we got deeper into this onion, there'd be things had no idea of, no understanding of when we started the research. And that's exactly what we found. So each layer of this unpeeling the onion was, we planned what we were going to do. We then did that, so into different levels of iteration. We then do it, and we check it. So plan, do, check, act. And that enabled us both to refine and quantify different layers of data, both on types of food, where that food was available, and also challenges and opportunities, but then also bring all that data together and design, then populate a searchable database that Second Harvest can use to directly align the sources of food with the demand of food that occurs amongst the organisation that it supplies. And that can be done down to the level of individual postcodes. And so that is the methodology we followed, and every time reflecting a continual improvement process, ensuring that there's robust data and results from the analysis. The actual collection of primary data occurred through 2 complementary surveys. One was a national survey. The second one was a distinct survey within Quebec. Having 2 distinct surveys that complemented each other, or the results complemented each other, enables us to compare and contrast those sets of data to both challenge and refute and support findings as we were developing our conclusions from the study, which led to enabled us to identify and produce robust, defendable, statistically strong data and results. So the knowledge gaps we sought to identify, which we, through the study, included the types, volumes, as I mentioned, the regional location of surplus edible food. Both short, long-term, medium-term opportunities, and connect the sources of that food with the needs, down to, as we said, individual postcodes. We wanted to identify, because there was a lot of assumptions in terms of what were the barriers that affected the ability, both ability to rescue the food that existed, but also businesses' willingness to donate food. And Laurie mentioned some of those. But going into this study, what we did not know is which of those factors were discretionary. They're like it's the different levels of grey. I might have a particular assumption about why I would or would not donate X amount of food, perhaps because I perceive risks that don't actually exist, or I perceive, as Laurie mentioned, certain businesses believe that donating food is going to cost me 3 times as much as just sending it to landfill or feeding it to animals. Then you get the discriminatory. And these are factors which are shaped by regulations, such as, for example, CFIA. If a truckload of meat the temperature of that truckload of meat exceeds a particular range in temperature, then that entire truckload has to be disposed of. It cannot, even if it's tested and proven to be safe from a food perspective, from a consumption perspective, in its present form or after processing, it cannot be donated. It has to be destroyed. Another example is fishing quotas. If a fisher has a quota that only pertains to a distinct type of fish, if they catch fish that are not covered by that quota, they will throw it away, even though it's perfectly good food. Because if they are found to have landed it, they will get fined and could lose their license completely. As well, the other discriminatory factor we found is that businesses' policies, in terms of if I am a food service business, I may have distinct policies on what food can be donated, if any food, and in what form and where it can be donated. And food processors. Food processors, we found, for example, they often implement conservative best before dates. And if I have a food that I know is approaching its best before date and I know it's perfectly safe, I cannot donate it because I would be going against my company's policy, and therefore that's potentially a reason that I could lose my job. And we also identify how those factors differ by business type, such as processors versus food service, and across different types of foods. Those are all insights and factors that previously did not know. They were not known. Across the industry, as Laurie mentioned, we identified over 60,000 proven businesses with surplus edible food. Out of those, we were able to prioritise a little over 40,000 based on the types of food and the ease of rescue. So, for example, meat versus produce, dairy versus fish, for example, and also their location in relation to known demand based on the invisible networks research, and also in terms of their location in terms of ease of access and redistribution. And we plotted that on a map. So in terms of the research finding, one of the key findings that we identified is that all businesses can be categorised into one of 3 groups, and none of them donate all of the possible surplus edible food that they could. Those groups that businesses can be categorised into is they have some surplus edible food and that they donate some of that. They have surplus edible food and they don't donate any of it, and that they don't believe they have surplus edible food based on their current understanding and policies. That does not mean that they do not have it. It means they don't recognise and acknowledge it. And the key reasons why businesses do not donate surplus food, as Laurie mentioned, incorrect perceptions of the world around them, incorrect perceptions of risks, incorrect perceptions of the cost, and incorrect perceptions of there won't be any benefits of this. And those research outcomes guided the development and conceptual testing of solutions for improving the donation of food, and those solutions are based on proven proven process improvement tools, so we know they will work. Thank you. I'll hand it back to Lloyd.
Thank you, Martin. Reducing food waste is a systemic challenge that requires collaboration across the supply chain, and we're going to recommend some solutions that can reduce this waste from farm to fork. There is a desperate need to incentivize businesses to donate more surplus food. Incentives can come from government policy changes that could include tax grant relief for food donation and increased landfill costs. The United States has successfully used tax relief measures that are tied to food donation. And if landfill costs increase, so do the financial benefits with donation. The rescue of surplus edible food can help address social and important environmental issues key to business stakeholders. The environmental costs of greenhouse gas emissions and the social costs of food insecurity can both be addressed by donating your surplus food. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions is a key element of ESG metrics, which are critical to institutional and private investors. Common standardized food rescue and redistribution processes and procedures is another needed solution. Education is still really required around best before dates. There's a prime opportunity there. Best before does not mean bad after. People still believe that best before is about safety, while in fact it's about food quality. Lastly, coordinated logistics in the form of localized, safe food collection hubs and services that are close to smaller donors, like hotels or restaurants, or to farmers within specific regions, will increase donation by reducing the need for businesses to provide storage, labor, and transportation costs. Also, unsold food that typically gets returned to vendors or distributors can be intercepted from the cycle that sends them to landfill, having them transported directly to a rescue organization or a charity or nonprofit using food. Second Harvest, as do all charities and nonprofits, exist where public policy doesn't. People need food charity in Canada because they don't have enough money in their pockets to purchase the food they need. We need strong anti-poverty programs and legislation in place to ensure Canadians can be successful. We have food loss and waste because there is no incentive not to. It was a hidden problem that wasn't understood as a direct and serious contributor to the climate crisis until only a short time ago. And we need public policy to ensure there is a drastic reduction of food loss and waste. At Second Harvest, like all charities, we're common sense leaders, and we commissioned this trilogy of research to understand the problems so we could identify the solutions. So now we all know 58% of all the food produced for Canadians is lost or wasted. There are over 61,000 charities and nonprofits across this country that are using food to feed Canadians. And only 4% of all the potential surplus edible food that is available is actually being rescued and redistributed. By having this information, industry, government, and nonprofits can create better networks and systems to drastically reduce the amount of food that is lost and wasted across the supply chain, thereby supporting the climate and the people. So we did the research. It's done. We must do better. More importantly, as a country, we need to drastically change how we value food. It's honestly just too important to throw away. So now we have the last research. Let's turn this wasted opportunity into a win. Thank you, and if you have any questions, Martin and I would be happy to take them now.